Saturday morning, from all things, the fucking sun is out, beautiful day, so I don't have much for breakfast and eat the remaining mushrooms I had in my box. I sit by the window and let the world pulse, melt, vibrate and move around. The sun is amazing, the computer plays mostly the Doors, what a morning. All this nice dripping puts me in a good mood and I decide I am ready for the DMT. I try the vaporizer that I bought but it seems that most of the vapor condenses on the cold glass. I try the pipe but it is blocked and most DMT catches fire, fuck. Sunday evening and I arrange to go and do Dimitri with my friend. We smoke some weed first and get the bong out, been tried and tested. So I have 2 trips first, I get the visuals I am also getting to the other place but this surely is not full on. My friend hits again and we reckon there must be some left on the bong. I want to break through so I take it and hit again. I lay back on the sofa, the feeling of this rushing energy concentrating on my head comes and I smile. It gets stronger. Is this going to take me through? I think to myself. It keeps getting stronger and I remember my friend that says unless you feel it is too much you have not gone through yet, and that is good cause it is getting too much and boom. I don't remember the exact order things happened but I am going to try and illustrate the best I can what I remember. So there is always this feeling past the initial phase of going through to this other place. It is hard to describe it to someone else unless they have felt it, but there is strong sense of going/being somewhere that feels very different from this reality, probably mainly because somehow the dimensionality feels different. I have a different sense of being that is very specific to that place, and this sense is always the same and extremely familiar but yet a bit alien. I don't remember if I spent lots of time during my strong trip in the visual pattern phase, but that feels a bit like watching through an almost tunnel vision all these patterns in space that change shape and colors and they come towards me, and sometimes they might have a bad vibe but I can manipulate it to some extent and give them a more positive feel. At some point the lights of some rushing patterns started forming this face that I interpreted as a bit sinister/evil so I directed some female sense to it and it soothed me. And then but maybe not necessary at this order I had this most profound realization, although I don't remember parts of it, that this is it, this life, its uniqueness, its transience, the loneliness of existence, and then felt that this is it but it is okay, and some people agreed with me that it is okay, and I also felt that it is okay for death to be one's most important thing and fear, but that is okay as well. Then I felt almost empathic the presence of some people including my boss and I had some fleeting thoughts and he said something too and I realized something but I can't remember this aspect. Then I remember being in this room. This is the place I have visited in the past with Salvia, only that now is less weird but more real. Salvia, like someone else said, is like mindfuck drug but in a bad way. So I am in this place but this is the place, I have been here before, in fact this is the room where I am really in. Somehow all the places I have visited in my life, all the things I have done are a mere transient movement of clips seen from this room. I have physically moved my body in different places but I have always been in this room. My existence is really in this room. It feels this is eternity. It feels like the most profound, real and awkward realization that I have ever made in my life. This place has always been there, I have been there, I will go back but once I am back in normal life I forget most about it and especially the feeling of it while I am there. I can't see a door, it is fairly dreamlike. I think there is probably 1 or 2 more people in there, they don't feel neither familiar nor strangers. Then I feel this room where I have always been is Sartre's description of heaven and hell and no exit aka behind closed doors. But I am not simply an observer in this room, I very much feel the whole concept of Sartre's idea. This realization at some point gets a bit creepy, most probably cause it gives the feeling of all the life as I know it is only a part, in fact there is more, and I am there in the other place too, and this is the most weird feeling, and then I hear someone saying that is why I don't like to widen my perception too much and I feel this was said as a response to me having this awkward feeling, but it is not scary just weird. And this widening of perception and the realization of the existence of this other place I think is a bit too much to have for when I get back to the real world, and I remember that I tend to forget what it feels like when I am back, and that is okay cause it can be very hard to live if the memory was any stronger than the one I have now. I also have a very faint memory of a white fair thing, maybe this is my wish for meeting the white rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, but I only remember so much. And then I feel I am taking the shape of a meditating monk, like the Buddhists you see sitting cross-legged, and the shape takes shape and it is me, and I am getting back the sense of my body and I feel that all this energy was concentrated on my head all along and now it gets distributed again throughout my body and then I am almost back. Almost as if during my trip and up to this point I was conserving energy and concentrating in my head. I feel that I haven't been breathing for a while and I have a very strong memory of the emotions that rush through me through the trip and they feel strong and I take a couple of deep breaths to relax. I open my eyes but my hearing is interrupted, my vision fairly disrupted too, it feels too much so I close my eyes. I remember hearing the other two guys, real persons in the room, commenting at a couple of times at the stages/phases I was in during my trip, but turns out it wasn't them. Immediately after the trip the emotions were still strong, but I got interrupted by the other guys so I forgot quite a lot, but remember that I wouldn't want to have another hit anytime soon because of the whole strength of the emotions I went through. It is interesting beyond belief. Even if I don't break through to the other side, the visuals on the first phase of the trip are really nice. I am in this space, with different colors, and for me it is either displayed on square boxy shapes or tunneling rushing imagery. I think for someone who hasn't experienced in some way before this feeling of the transience of existence and death and chaos, the first phase of my DMT trip would have been perceived a bit stronger, but for me the room is the most surreal feeling and sense of existence I ever have. If I believed in life after death, then this would have been the place, no question about it. Several years ago, I experimented with DMT. I was introduced to this chemical through a friend of mine who was heavily into shamanism. Over a 12-month period, I smoked it 4 times, with ever-increasing doses. My friend recommended that I work my way up to the spirit dose. This was wise, because even in smaller doses, it can be a frightening experience. On my 5th journey, I found them, or more accurately, they found me. I've since read accounts from McKenna and Strassman's subjects. I guess my experience was similar, though I didn't perceive myself as being inside a structure. Rather, it seemed that the spirits were all around me. Wherever I looked, the swirling patterns transmogrified into these oscillating things which clearly acted independently of my own thoughts. At least that was the overwhelming perception I had. I can't really describe them, they were infinite in their complexity. I can see why people are convinced that they are entities separate from their own minds. It's inconceivable that anyone can imagine such. I don't what you'd call them or it. Anyway, I was there, wherever the hell it was, and all of a sudden each one of my fingers was connected to a spirit. Here's where it gets really strange. There were thousands of them near me now, and millions in the distance, though if I looked at the distant ones, they zoomed up close. So, next thing I know, each hand has thousands of fingers. I had complete control over each one. Like we can move our left index finger, I could control left finger 40,624. It was like I was a conductor. They were dancing and flying around in accordance with what I did with my super hands. Sound and sight seemed to merge and shift. I was conducting an orchestra of millions. There was a lot of other stuff too, but I have never been able to recall it. My final memory is being in absolute nothingness, except for one spirit. As I looked at it, it started to oscillate, so as I was looking at myself, or what I perceived was myself, I was changing form 1,000 times a second. The oscillations became faster, and the spirit wanted to know who it was. It wasn't asked in words, but I knew what the question was, somehow. I said I don't know. This conversation went back and forth at an ever greater speed until, at the same time, we were both saying he is you as he is you. Then the words converged into hue, literally it was blue. I mean, I became the color blue. A psychedelic play on words. I was a frequency. Then this spirit rushed up to me from the other side of the galaxy, laughing. He had a present, like a normal box with a blue ribbon, and he said, "What's your favorite hue?" Next thing I knew I'd opened my eyes. The extra freaky element was that I had turned my head around and was looking straight out the window, at, you guessed it, a big clear blue sky. Once I had met them, or myself, perhaps, I certainly don't ascribe to the literal idea that DMT is conducive to contacting aliens, I decided not to do DMT again. I have experienced total and absolute fucking out there, and I'd be scared that if I did it again, that I wouldn't make it back. I don't think that there could be a more intense experience. However, I never imagined I'd experience what I did either. It's amazing, but a word of caution, it isn't a fun party drug. Some people want to go skydiving, and that's cool. But this was like being a Super Bowl bouncing around the universe. At the time, it really was too much. The final freakiness? At certain times of the morning or afternoon, I look at the sky, and get this déjà vu feeling. It's just the right shade of blue. A composite essay of my first 2 DMT trips. Disclaimer, this is a pale reflection of a bottomless mystery. The things I say it is now, these are but linguistic shrouds I am able to cloak it in. Please don't think you know DMT from having read this, you don't. But do please consider trying some. Go extract it from a plant, then you'll know. Everything here is with closed eyes unless otherwise indicated. This is really the only way to go deep. The small wooden pipe was in my mouth and a match was coming to light it. The scenario almost seemed like smoking pot, except I knew the taste to be very wrong as the complex, sweetly acrid smoke filled my lungs. Anyway, my pulse never raced like this from the anticipation of getting stoned. The first thing was a sense of dropping away, but to say downward would be too simple. There were all sorts of frequency modulations and crescendoed staccato pops as the trip descended. This sound data was quiveringly involved with these visual architectonic dream waters that were beginning to emerge, dripping and slipping among themselves, and my being became overwhelmed by vacuous, gravity-like suction experiences which impelled me further in. Around me I felt a crowding in of beings as if the Celtic fairyland of Fae had become momentarily co-present with where I was. I sensed them, but did not experience these creatures. The sucking experience took over for a while then, driving the morphological acrobatics of space love that lay before me. There was something about it that makes me think of a voluptuous alien seductress with big, fat lips pulling me to her body in the weirdest feeling embrace ever. It felt like I was being smeared sensually and lustfully around the space in some sort of vacuum tube funhouse. At this point, maybe a minute into the experience, I started picking up something like the Escher painting of all those sets of stairs with figures descending by all manners of gravity, only its surfaces were emerald isles of what I can only describe as fractal Medusa liquid, serpentine and sexy. There was a thought that I was in a room full of aliens and they were playing with me, but that somehow they had conspired to make me this way. The alien carny music bar on the planet Tatooine in the Star Wars trilogy seems relevant. Then I had the thought, which just seems to pop up and not really pertain: what have I done? How did I get this way? Meaning, how did I come to enter something so foreign that my petty human ontological premises and hopeful body of knowledge seemed like a wrench trying to adjust a camel? At that point I lost any touch with my body and was thrust forward into complete and utter amazement. The world became so crammed full of intricacy to the nth that it seemed every nook and cranny in my space-time was exfoliating little crystalline dancing worlds, bellowing ecstasy. It moved like snakes move, all rippling of muscle and sun-glinting scales. I cannot emphasize enough the catapulting, titanic motions of this iridescent zigzag bottle rocket, this nuanced, whittling circus of form, this Brobignagian roller coaster safari across the jeweled plains of Wonderland, straining the limits of the knowable. This is where I was when I felt a certain sort of shockwave across the dome of the sky which gave me memory of the real world. I then entered this whole journey that I would call extrication. Going in was intrication or delving into intricacy, so coming back out was sensibly extrication. The experience was very literally an incredible groping back out of this wild woolly thing until I made it out, which afterwards I realized was only the physical action of opening my eyes. The pipe was in my mouth, its touching my lips had been the reality shockwave I'd felt. The woman who was handling the pipe for me looked like a fractal Medusa as well, but incarnate. She was buzzing all over with this really freaky energy. I said something like, "You expect me to call this a mouth?" A comment which was silenced by the stem of the pipe. One token I was out of my body again, yanked back through the scrim of the worlds into the blast furnaces of heaven. I came to in some sense at this point and realized that I could do anything in a space like this, could instantly unfold my richest possible imaginings. O.K. I said to myself, what about trying to do what you believe possible by your perceptual theory of higher dimensional experience? You see, I got the idea that there is no reason why, in an inner experience, one has to have visions only in front of one. I began to believe this was an imprint that years of bringing the external world into construction of inner spaces had created, but was not necessary. I then tried to imagine what it would be like to see in every direction at once, i.e. what would a ball look like if you could see every side of it at once? I could sense it but not imagine it in my mind. So this is the challenge I set myself. It not only seemed to work, though with everything else going on inside, it was a bit like trying to do a sensitive physics experiment in the midst of a drunken bacchanal, but it did so immediately. I rushed upwards into this superspace that was a spun galactic ecology of stars, a swarming hive of dragonfly constellations. This was very profound, but in doing it, it seemed I had reduced the alien quality of what had been going on previous to this excursion. I let my will go then and tumbled forward into Elfland. Terence McKenna is apt in calling these entities elves. They are elves/not elves. They don't appear, they kind of ooze out of the woodwork seductively, and before you know it they're there. The whole realm is infested with these creatures like nothing else you could ever imagine. They do sing things that are like self-dribbling jeweled basketballs or whatever you want to call them. They make Fabergé egg concoctions with ingredient lists like 1, Space. 2. Lust. 3. Politics. 4. Circus sideshows. 5. Time. 6. Gallbladders. 7. Existential notions of polyfidelity. 8. Cucumbers. 9. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. 10. The smell of petunias, and so on. This is somewhat of an arbitrary list, but the point is, all my categories of mind fell away because they were being ceaselessly synthesized and resynthesized into these hyperdimensional objects, ululating along. It makes me think of getting home from school when your mother says that she's baked you some treats, only these are like no treats mom ever made, and when you see them you almost want to say, "Aw, Mom, you shouldn't have. I mean you really shouldn't have." What you do with these elves is some sort of a game of catch, only the physics of the game has been replaced by the physics of synesthesia. In catching the things they threw, in playing with them, I participated in the ineffable mysteries that they were. This place is the Joycean merry-go-round. Being there I came to understand the Heraclitus fragment, the eon is a child at play with colored balls. It is this? As well I understand, still the first day, All Fool's Day, here at the center. It is this too. So for what seemed like centuries I played with the trippy freaky elves and they kept bringing me into atrium after atrium in the Antics Annex, and all I could do was wonder when we would get to their front door. As far as I know, we never did. Instead they said many things, though I can say they used what we would call a voice to accomplish this communication. I remember only parts of this. At first they said, "Build this," indicating hyperspace. Later they amended this by saying, "Build it. He will come." From the movie Field of Dreams. Very funny. Then it was as though alarms started to go off, and the whole space was going through these quivering emergency elaborations. I get the image of a submarine movie sequence when I think back on this, just when it has been discovered on the surface, the periscope retracts and the whole interior goes into haywire, preparatory gymnastics as all the hatches are battened down. There is a phenomenally high energy dynamic associated with this part, as they try to get you out and shut the great bronze dancing doors of hyperspace. It is as if everything is charged with imponderable electricities and is racing around because someone shouted, "Places everyone." They start cramming your soul out of there with a million hands at once, grabbing you by 12 dimensions you never knew your body had. Finally, the thing shuts and there is a sense of finality to that, but just as soon you are on to the next thing. Slowly then it begins to make farewells and say its goodbyes. Ancient mythos holds that the world is supported by turtles all the way down, but as I came out of it, my sense was of jeweled great glass revolving elevators all the way down. I remember thinking that I was passing back through the 50,000 veils that the Sufis say the mystery has, one by one, and I clearly remember the awe I felt that each one of them was closed, sealed, and put away in a unique and voluptuous, succulent way. It was without question the most beautiful goodbye I have known in this life. There was no regret of leaving or longing not to leave, just an overpowering acceptance of the imminent return. This went on, and upon opening my eyes I had this very zap experience and I was right back in this world, amazingly enough, only 10 minutes gone. Slight tracers on light and then these gone too. I was amazed of the idea that one could go back there, could in fact just go there, that where I had been felt entirely like it was a whole hyperspace, raging right next door. I remember saying, and being very sure of this as I still am now, "Those are the gods." By which I meant, of all the things I've experienced in life, they are the most like real living gods, and should be called that. It was very interesting to me that I didn't need to process a whole lot, which I usually require after the mushrooms. Instead, I think I was in a state of being so existentially surpassed by the quality of what I had just been a part of, that I couldn't muster any sort of conceptual or descriptive response to it at all. By default, I was left with just a purity of acceptance for it, I just simply had nothing to put to it in any sense. Instead I resorted to looking wildly and deeply into other people's eyes and by some existential perceptual force, to impress upon them the utter beauty of what I had just been. This seemed to work somewhat, though probably not. I definitely felt I had been closer to the core of the real than ever before, and that this mystery is front and center to who we are as humans, who we really are. I felt very connected to my universe, very sensitive and strong and in touch with things. Because I apparently have the gift of being able to remember it quite well, others do not. I have to live with memory of its being out there somewhere, very real, very powerful, very alive. There has not been an hour to pass since I did it that I haven't thought of it and tried again to reference it to this world, failing. I do feel it is a very important experience to have as a human being, and in some sense a whole lot safer than mushrooms or acid. I say this because I am aware that I usually have time and opportunity in a traditional trip to come up with weird ideas and believe them, which can be hell to integrate when things return to normal. DMT seems to be so awe-inspiring, one is just so floored by it, that there is no chance for trying to figure it out. This is left for when you return, spacecraft still steaming. This was my third attempt at DMT. My first and second attempts were startling as my body began to vibrate all over with uncanny energy. The room began to resonate along with what was happening to my body. Everything took on a shimmering, almost plastic quality. A sound came through almost like a metronome set to a high setting, although not quite annoying like a metronome tick, as if through the matter of the room itself, shut out everything. I felt that if I took another hit, as I knew I would have to in order to break through the hyperspace, I would be sucked out of my body. From what I've heard, the experience is tantamount to an out-of-body experience. I panicked a little, fearing that it was going to be something similar to a bad experience I'd had when I tried salvia a few months prior. In that experience I'd been transported to some place where I lost all sense of self and couldn't get out. I didn't want to bring anything like that upon myself again. I couldn't bring myself to take another hit on either the first or second try. Instead, I leaned back in the recliner and closed my eyes, enjoying very briefly a series of images flickering on a panel that very much resembled a slot machine. But rather than 3 slots there were many, and I was zoomed in on just a fraction of the full blueprint of whatever language this was. The symbols/motifs didn't roll down, they transformed from one into another, so quickly that even if I understood the language, I wouldn't have been able to make sense of what I was seeing. But I was yearning to experience hyperspace, and I'd done a lot of work to extract what little DMT I had. A couple of days later I set up about 25 to 30 milligrams on a spoon within a very crudely improvised device that I could use to melt the chemical from underneath and breathe the vapor through a funnel on top. I put some Vaseline on my lips and in my mouth to try and protect it. I burned the top of my lip the second time, although this didn't really help much. I began to melt the DMT in breath through the funnel. I built up puffs of smoke slowly, trying to hold each for as long as I could. The first 3 times produced very little, the device wasn't very efficient, but by the 4th hit, when I finally got a lungful of smoke, the familiar sensations were beginning to overtake me. I forced myself to hold in the 4th, and then took the 5th as my body grew incredibly heavy and the room began to change. Even as I was holding the 5th and burning more, I could no longer hear the sizzling of the DMT in the spoon. Then I could no longer move my body at all and I stopped trying. I leaned back and, still holding the last big breath, saw everything on the table and the computer desk shimmering, melting, and fading away all at the same time. I closed my eyes and saw swirls upon swirls of color and energy. Everything was happening so fast I knew I wouldn't be able to remember any of this. I probably could have done a much better job had I not been desperately trying to hold on to my sense of self. I know from reading about it that failure to let go is antithetical to really getting a lot out of the experience. So while these unspeakable vignettes, fractals and orbs were flying toward me, grasping and pulling upon my consciousness, stroking the core of my awareness, I was trying to scramble back to my body. Such a mistake. I wish I'd stopped fighting it, stopped saying to myself, "See, I'm still me." Somewhere in all this stream of willy-nilly, psychedelic information, I'm still me. Still me. See. There I am. That thought is for me, even while all of this is happening. How can I think like that when all of this is going on? Doesn't that mean that everything out there that I'm seeing is not me? I suppose like many of those who are starting out with DMT, they worry that they won't be able to get back to their bodies. But even in the worry I noticed that there was someone in the midst of the kaleidoscope. It wasn't an immediate realization. I began to see a transparent sphere, with translucent edges, and a glowing, pulsing orange life force within, leaping to and fro in my vision. Manipulating the egg-like orbs from behind, and above, and the sides, was this person. I never saw a face, but I saw enough of his body to know that he was naked. There was no evidence of gender, although he seemed masculine, and his arms were pumping madly, touching the sphere, rolling the sphere, squeezing the sphere. The weirdest thing of all was that he seemed to be doing it for my benefit. He was trying to show me something, to change me through the spherical egg. By the time I became fully conscious of all this, I was all too soon slipping away from it, reluctantly now re-entering myself. I sat in the chair, found it difficult to move my limbs. But then I realized that I didn't want to move just yet. I sat there for some time trying to recollect what I'd just seen. I feel that somehow, I missed the most important part of it while I was too busy trying to reassure myself that I was still me. A few things came to me in afterthought. The old compulsion I've had in earlier years, when I was much happier, to organize my world has come back. I hope it stays with me. I feel that it is not so much the neurotic need to control my space as it is to have everything laid out and categorized so I can make better sense of it and increase my understanding of life. I have looked through a lot of things and experimented very much with states of consciousness lately, but I still feel that I am only scratching the surface of what it means to be alive in this physical world. I suspect that our place here is tremendously important, and how lucky we are to be a part of it. I know that part of this urge is a direct reaction to the inability to make sense of what I just saw. It was pure data presented to me in such a way that my brain could only interpret as chaos. Now that I'm back, I feel compelled to make sense of the things that are within my capacity to understand. One of the best ways of doing this is to keep a journal. In high school I kept a huge journal that nearly reached 300 pages at one point. It is unfortunate that I can no longer look back on this, reflect and learn from where my mind was at that point, because in a fit of shame and self-incrimination, I deleted it. Now I want to continue using a journal through an electronic medium, but without strict rules about what should go into it and why. I had recently acquired a batch of DMT freebase after only a few months of researching the molecule and feeling the urge to try it out. Or possibly more appropriately, it decided to find me. I could hardly contain my excitement when it was finally in my hands, yet there was still a feeling of anxiety there as well, as I've heard how intense this molecule can be. I had already prepared for the journey by purchasing a glass vaporizer pipe just for the occasion. When the time felt right, I loaded up my pipe with a modest amount, around 20 milligrams, of DMT, sat back on my bed and took the full amount of vapor in with one long toke off of the pipe. The initial effects are quite evident within 10 to 20 seconds of taking the first hit. The colors of objects around me begin to take on what I can only describe as a watercolor or stained glass effect. They begin to blend together in obvious gradients, and nothing appears as it once did. I also observe the cellophane wrinkling sound that many people mention coming from inside my head, but I think I would describe my perception of it to be more of a mechanical sound that modulates in frequency until it's no longer noticeable. I close my eyes. A veil is pushed aside and my vision stretches to infinity. It feels like I'm on a horizontal plane that extends into the space around me. My vision is no longer limited by the curvature of the earth, there is no horizon here, the surface just stretches out in a perfectly straight line into infinity. I get a feeling of being able to see in every direction at once, regardless of which way I'm facing. Field of vision is merely a consequence of our earthly vessels, and that lack of a handicap hints to me that I, my consciousness, am now effectively separated from my body. With this refound vision, I see colors primarily of a deep purple with slight shimmers of blue and green protruding from point to point. These colors make up the substance of a fractal spiderweb constantly being morphed into the most beautiful geometry I could ever receive. Portions of the web billow out and in and even in directions not easily understood. The colors and shapes whirl. It's as if when I direct my consciousness towards the pattern reacts by whirling. So with just a simple thought on what the pattern might be, or the slight movement of my eyes, or even the intake of breath, the pattern will twist in a new direction. I'm reminded of spooky physics, subatomic particles that react instantaneously in concordance with a twin particle potentially light years away. Or how light particles will behave like waves, but only if you're not observing them in any way. It also reminds me of the butterfly effect, where even a simple thought can start into affect a chain of events, seconds, minutes, weeks, maybe millenniums later, that manifests the initial goal of that thought. The vision is just unreal. I keep thinking not only does it seem improbable, it seems impossible for shapes of this nature to exist. The billowing threads of the web and the impossible directions in which they move make me think of a hypercube. The most evident and larger shapes in the pattern appear on the outside of the vision, while the shapes on the inner portion of the vision are much smaller and difficult to make out as they combine into a point of singularity, like a fractal. It feels like I am sitting in the center point of a giant sphere, but the sphere stretches to infinity at any point I try to focus my vision. Later, I'm reminded of the saying that God is an intelligible sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. I get the sense of a human-like figure near what I consider the top of this vision. She matches the colors around her, and even looking directly at her is like seeing something in my peripheral vision. Yet, I am still able to clearly discern that she is a multi-armed female as is depicted in Hindu art. It seems as if she is the puppeteer to the intricate vision I am having. As I begin to feel a slight drop towards baseline, I become aware of a very distracting sensation in my throat, kind of like a mucus strip. But even as my concentration wanes, I get pulled back in by a gentle sensation of warmth in the form of a small circle on my face. It seems to be directed from the top central portion of the patterns I am observing, and I get the strong feeling I am supposed to pay attention. It's almost like beam of light, a finger, being refracted through a magnifying glass and aimed onto my face, a very pleasant warmth. I unconsciously whirl the geometry again so that the beam comes to rest on my third eye and I feel it become stationary there. The geometric patterns also stand still as if in anticipation. The beam, finger, seems to meld through my skin, through my skull and directly into my third eye. I experience a moment of extreme euphoria at this point, unlike anything I recall ever having felt in the past. I am in complete and utter awe. I begin to drift back to reality just minutes later, as if slightly losing phase with the wave the visions are presented on. So I attempt to open my eyes. The shadows on the wall in front of me are spinning like gears, each in a clockwise direction with the same sort of consciousness reactive motion I observed in the web vision behind closed eyes. There are also many repetitious patterns becoming evident in the texture on the wall. Every linear shadow on the wall pulls perspective across it, even a straight horizontal line somehow exhibits depth as well as a length. It's almost dizzying. The patterns are intriguing, yet a white collection of light from the window reflects off the wall and catches my eye. As I gaze at it, the splotch on the wall appears to tear open a bit wider, like a dilating pupil, as if attempting to keep my undivided attention. In this simple glowing amorphous shape, every conceivable color and even some inconceivable colors can be seen hovering on the outer edges of the light. The best analogy I can come up with is the rainbow effect that occurs on the surface of a soap bubble. This membrane of colors around the light amoeba seems almost multidimensional, as it exists in no distinct stable form around the light. I stare at this for what seems like a very long time. Eventually, about 10 minutes into the trip, I notice the odd sensation in my throat again. This time it completely thwarts my concentration, and I get a strong desire for something to drink. I think the closed-eye visual portion of my experience could have lasted longer had I been able to forbear this discomfort and had continued to concentrate. After everything is said and done, I am left with a strange, déjà vu-like feeling, like this isn't the first time I've experienced something like this. All in all, the most profound psychedelic experience I have ever had, having also done LSD, shrooms, and 2CE. The following is a report of the insights I got from this first trip into hyperspace. Afterthoughts. I subconsciously used the word receive, the most beautiful geometry I could ever receive, in the 5th paragraph. I had initially written this record using a stream of consciousness technique as soon as I was able to after coming down from the peak. I know I meant to say imagine, and I don't remember writing receive. But if you follow any of the theory that DMT enables one to sync up with something like a carrier wave that allows for the receipt of information, you can see why I decided to leave it as is. Not to mention, I just recently began studying Kabbalah, and an important aspect that I've learned from it so far explains the relationship between the creator and the created. The creator is in a constant state of bestowal, while we, the creatures, are in a constant state of receiving. Is it possible that in ancient times, even before written language, humanity's stories on creationism and early mythology represented some innate knowledge we all share in a collective consciousness? Like the fingerprint of God left upon us as He placed us on this world? Could that idea have passed into our earliest forms of writing and expression and inevitably have found its way into our religious texts? Like some sort of neurolinguistic device that speaks to us spiritually by transcending the limitations of modern-day language, like the universal language said to have existed prior to the legend of the Tower of Babel. Consider the fact that an idea seems to propagate on its own and can flourish like something alive. For example, look at modern-day memes. Think about the video with the ticklish kitten, or the one where a little boy's finger is bitten by his baby brother Charlie. Both of which, propagating through transfer from person to person, not unlike a virus, have probably been seen or at least heard of by a relatively huge portion of Western civilization. What would happen if something similar happened with this fingerprint of God idea? What if it adopted a life of its own, and survived and evolved with the ever-changing social dogmas over time? Wouldn't some part of this idea eventually manage to penetrate all forms of media as we know it today? From TV and movies, to books, video games, music and art? If so, as the amount of information humans create and have access to increases at an exponential rate, wouldn't everything eventually bear some relation to this fingerprint? If that's the case, it would become increasingly difficult for the more observant of us to ignore the signs and synchronicities presented by it anymore. Exactly how would this idea, imprinted at the time of creation, embedded in the stuff that makes up language and thought, be evident to us? What signs would we see that are representative of this force? I believe I was guided to experience DMT and what it could teach me by just such a force. It's easy to see this force if you just pay attention. I think that the force is made apparent in what we call coincidence. But coincidence is a poor word choice to describe the phenomenon. It's a word we conveniently use to shrug off improbable synchronistic events instead of admitting that sometimes the impossible is possible. Instead of blowing off said synchronicities, we should take them as a sign that we're currently on the right path. We should realize that these little reminders of our existence are actually breadcrumbs left by a higher power to help guide us off of the rugged and beaten path of normality and back onto the path to enlightenment. In his book, The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho uses my favorite term for this phenomenon. He calls them omens, written in the language of the world. My omen came to me in the form of a dream, which is ironic in the fact that our body's endogenous DMT is believed to be released when we dream. About a week and a half before trying DMT for the first time, I had this very vivid dream which centered around me discovering that I had a previously untapped power. It all revolved around sacred geometric tattoos that appeared on my left arm which I could use to summon different animals. A fun dream all in all, but I felt very strongly that there was more behind the symbology of what I saw. So, I delved into some internet research. One of the first things that came up when I searched for the most vivid symbols from my dream, the animal I remember summoning, a wingless dragon-like creature, and the geometrical design of the tattoo that I used to summon the animal, was an old alchemy scroll. On the scroll, inside a depiction of the sun, were 3 circles laid out in a triangular fashion exactly as the tattoo appeared in my dream. Beneath it was a depiction of the moon, and in the space between the earth and the celestial bodies was an animal that bore a striking resemblance to the creature I manifested in my dream. It was the bird of Hermes. Many parallels could be drawn to Hermes and my afterthoughts in that he is the messenger of the gods and is often linked to communication and language, the very tools necessary for the propagation of the fingerprint idea I spoke of earlier. Being as the subject of alchemy has coincidentally presented itself to me twice earlier this year, once in the form of the book, The Alchemist, which helped me through a rough point in my life, and once in an insatiable urge to read the Full Metal Alchemist manga series, I decided to continue down that route of research. I did some cursory reading of the basics of alchemy, and ran across a book called The Book of Aquarius, My Astrological Sign. This modern-day book is supposed to divulge the secret of the Philosopher's Stone and how to create it using an all-too-familiar yet generally revolted thing. I had to read about a third of the way into the book to learn finally that the easiest ingredient to use in the creation of the stone was none other than urine. I chuckled when I first read this, but pondering further, I now believe that this symbol could be case in point of my inescapable collision with the fingerprint idea, and its profound effect on my psyche. More links to mythology. I noticed that the word urine's etymology comes from the Greek word for it, auron, meaning to rain, drip. Many say that the Greek god Uranus's name was derived from auron as well, as is often spelled Oranos. The reason for this could be because Uranus was the god of the heavens, and the rain that fell from heavens fertilized the earth, Gaia. One of the children born of Gaia and Uranus was Hermes, high again. The Roman equivalent of Hermes was Mercury. Mercury is commonly referred to in alchemist texts as one of the main chemicals used in the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. So, I did what any studious alchemist would do in their endeavors to learn the truth. I attempted to turn lead into gold, metaphorically at least, by taking this little stone of knowledge, that urine can be used to create the Philosopher's Stone, back to the internet to see if I could read between the lines and polish my stone of knowledge into a gem of truth. It turns out that at least one alchemist, by the name of Hennig Brand, indeed did experiments with urine trying to create the stone. While never having reportedly created the stone, he did, in 1669, through a preparation of urine, discover white phosphorus, which was derived from the phosphates present in our urine. Another planetary/mythological link here, phosphorus was the original Greek name for the planet Venus. This got me to thinking, if this chemical was extracted from human excrement, what other previously undiscovered chemicals could have been discovered through such work? So without further ado, I present to you the hypothesis that one of the methods used to make the Philosopher's Stone was the process of distilling human urine and obtaining trace amounts of the stone, or what modern scientific vernacular may be calling it today, DMT, excreted as waste from our own bodies. By now you're probably thinking, you've got to be kidding me, right? Okay, I know this is far-fetched. The odds of someone ever extracting a significant, usable amount of DMT from a concentration of human urine are slim to none. But, bear with me and my ramblings a bit longer in support of my fingerprint idea that ancient ideas may be encoded within ancient texts, and that this idea has the potential to lead to a path of transcendence and enlightenment. DMT just happens to be what my mind arrived at full circle while trying to read between the lines, tracing a string of coincidences to arrive at a very definitive idea. So, rather than thinking of alchemists splashing around in their own urine to derive a psychedelic substance, consider DMT as my derived symbol of achieving higher consciousness, whereas the alchemists may have used the philosopher's stone as their symbol for the same thing. So, how does this symbolic representation of higher consciousness compare with the touted abilities of the philosopher's stone? Like its legendary ability to create the elixir of life, which can cure disease and extend life, or its reputed ability to grant immortality to whomever imbibes pieces of the stone on a regular basis. First, achieving a higher consciousness could be thought of as granting one the ability to heal their own disease. The basic idea of mind over matter has been shown to have a ring of truth to it, as shown through the successful use of placebos. Being in a higher state of consciousness, experiencing the dissolution of the ego, may provide some with an ideal environment in which to come face to face with oneself, granting the ability to potentially absolve deep psychological blocks which may be manifesting themselves as ailments in the body. He who masters the mind masters everything. The aspect of extending life could arise from the great feeling of well-being and knowing that can come from a successful journey into higher states of consciousness. The experience can leave one with a more spiritual and positive outlook on life, which may lead to a less stressful life, which in turn can contribute to a longer life. In fact, just recently, scientists have begun to release reports about long-lasting positive psychological effects present in subjects using psilocybin mushrooms. Also, Amazonian shamans speak of the purgative and medicinal qualities of ayahuasca. What about the claims of immortality? Certainly, if the ancient alchemists discovered the secret to eternal life, we'd still see all the masters of the art teeming about today. We might even get a glimpse of Sir Isaac Newton at the supermarket picking up a bushel of apples. Actually, I believe that what the alchemists refer to as immortality is really the existence of life after death, not its literal sense of never dying. A commonly viewed notion in many, mainly Eastern, religions is that a prerequisite to traversing beyond our current physical plane of reality when we die is to first achieve a state of higher consciousness while still trapped in our bodies of this world. Only then can you truly move on to higher realms. So, it would seem, as far back as we can recall, there has always been this elemental idea that coexists with us within our societies. An idea that takes different forms as it goes, passed down from mythology to art to religion to science to everything in between. An idea that is, to many of us, very alluring and ever-present in our minds. An idea that has been pursued by many great minds of the past, i.e. famous alchemists like Isaac Newton and C.G. Jung. An idea that is, in my mind, a beacon to return to the source of it all. A return to the consciousness that created everything. To come full circle from being the creator, to experiencing the creation using the bodies we've been presented, to once again becoming the creator. This idea is initially so incomprehensible, that those of us that come anywhere close to actually experiencing a taste of this higher consciousness come up with a way to rationalize it in terms of our current cultural constraints. In ancient times, those experiences of higher consciousness were perceived as having a direct conversation with God. Moses and the burning bush, etc. Now with our more scientific view of the world, and our great curiosity of space and the cosmos, I think one new way of us coping with this experience is for us to say we have come into contact with alien beings. Both ideas come down to the same thing, however, which is in essence recognizing the existence of a higher consciousness existing within ourselves. But sadly, I think we've been out of contact with this consciousness for such a long time, it is so foreign to us, that instead of seeing it as an additional aspect of ourselves, we externalize it as if it were something speaking to us from the outside. So what does all of this mean exactly? To be honest, your guess is as good as mine. All I know is that I will continue to pursue this higher consciousness, as it seems to be an inevitable and integral part of my life, and I invite those of you who feel as I do to join me in experiencing the profound and spreading the ideas that burst forth. After all, it is written. I watch the powder melt into a puddle and then to a faint white vapor in the bulb of my freebase pipe. It doesn't look like much, but when I breathe in, the pipe lights an opaque white and doesn't fade until I stop my drag. I hold a hit, and patterns are already flitting on my dresser and desk and in the corner of my eye, as I look around my lightless bedroom which I'm alone in. I can tell that this hit alone won't suffice, and I start to vaporize the DMT again. As I take my second hit, the patterns enhance rapidly and the glass bulb of the pipe steadily shrinks and expands like a balloon. This is it. I quickly set the pipe to my side before I'm unable to. The patterns around my room converge on me and consume my consciousness. I'm no longer counting the seconds to holding my breath. I'm not in my room anymore, but where I am, I don't know. It's dark and congested with thoughts like a ball of knots that I'm tasked to untie. Nothing quite makes sense. It's all a riddle half solved. I grasp for comprehension, but the futility becomes nauseating to the umpteenth degree. Whatever it is I'd done to wind up in this tornado of incomprehensible thought, I wish now that I hadn't. On a dark wet street corner, I see my mother and sister standing. The sight of them aches in me the way loved is when it's far and out of reach and all there is to hold onto is a memory. Then the thought drops out into the abyss, and I'm left with a feverish desire for what I've already forgotten. I taste, for a moment, numerous tiny metallic pellets rolling all along my tongue like space candy I can't swallow. Then they too vanish. A voice is calling out among the chaos for my attention and I'm finally able to discern it from the hodgepodge of sensory overload. As if all in one syllable, it tells me it will show me an image to make sense of what's happening, so pay close attention. Then, as if somebody flicked the switch on a Viewmaster, an image appears of a rainbow-striped smile and eyes like wet spaghetti noodles. I try to make sense of it, but the face means nothing to me, and I grow terrified because I understand now that I'm helplessly falling apart in every sense of the word. Still, I'm desperate to gain an understanding. The voice comes to me again, telling me to prepare myself because here comes the image, and there it is, the same jester-like smile that I realize now is simply toying with me, and then again it's gone. Anxiety and humiliation consume me like I'm a school kid stuttering at the front of the classroom, and the only way out is to book it only here I can't run. I'm a cow being prodded to the slaughterhouse without a clue as to what's going on except to know I should be very afraid. I quit. I surrender. But still the agony doesn't relent, and deeper grow the roots of primal fear. It's not as if I'm physically dying. My body isn't being destroyed. No, it's far, far worse than that. The ghost of my being, my everything is evaporating and I'm slipping to nothing at all. Black hole. I'm done. Everything calms and slows like a pinwheel submitting to gravity, and I find myself in an infinite chandelier ocean of dazzling dark pink fractals extending into and through me all as one, and like a flash of light, I feel love. 4 beings are in front of me, staring at me with concern as I lie curled, trembling. These creatures take an amorphous shape, and I can only depict them from the fractal space around them because they have an aura about them. An undeniable life force creating an unseeable seam between what is them and what isn't. If these creatures want to skin and eat me, by all means, they can, as I shrink tighter in my fetal position, petrified, paralyzed, and still in surrender to my own disintegration. Telepathically, they assure me that I'm alright now, and with a hint of annoyance, they remind me that what I'd experienced was necessary for me to arrive here, and they're right. I had done this before, I knew what I was in for. Then again, one can never truly brace for ego death, at least at this speed. I'm thinking next time I'll buy my ticket for the ayahuasca cruise line. I've had my fill of the Mach-10 space shuttle in smokable form. The fear is still pulsating, and I want them to know it, but when I tell them, words don't form in my mouth. Rather, the feeling transfers to them, raw and unabbreviated. There is no way of sugarcoating it, no need explaining it with tongue-twisted metaphors. No desperate search for the perfect words in a deep vernacular sea. It's simply given, pure and true. They're able to muster a bit more sympathy to comfort me, but I'm embarrassed now like the drunk high schooler at a party, neck deep in a toilet bowl as people hand him water and rub his back while he wonders if he's still cool. One of the creatures before me moves across the fractal space like a current through water and grabs a piece of paraphernalia, then he and another creature continue past me. The two don't have much interest in me. They pass behind me, I assume to become intoxicated on whatever alien compound they'll consume through their paraphernalia. I realize now that I must be in what I can best fathom is a trans-dimension hookah lounge, a hangout of sorts. How these beings came to this space, I don't know. I wonder whether they're of this dimension, or if they've come from elsewhere as I have, and that I appear in the same physical composition to them as they do to me, that the physical structure of this realm is a medial plane for interdimensional beings to coexist. Faced with the 2 remaining entities, I can sense their empathy more than the others. These 2 have a particular interest in me. They see me fully, past my frail ego into the seed of my soul. There is no longer an instinct for me to conceal myself and hide. There isn't fear or a feeling of being ostracized, no reason for vulnerability. I trust these beings, whom now I see to be a couple, a male and a female. It's profound. It isn't profound in a way like the tickling feeling of falling in love. It's nothing like staring out at the ocean with the tide sliding over your toes and realizing the vastness of the universe. Rather, beings are gazing infinitely deeper into me as I stare into them, and it's as if the floodgates of our souls have been lifted so everything that is me can be centralized and experienced by them, and everything that's each of them is flowing into me without reserve, and they into each other. We use no strategic nor deceptive tactics in our communication, nor do we offer any timidity. By this shameless trusting we unsheath ourselves and stare endlessly at the unadulterated essence that we are. There is nothing in all of existence that could be more beautiful than these two beings radiating love with me. I had catapulted myself out of a rocket-fueled cannon through space and time at a speed faster than light, shedding every last layer of my ego, to wind up in this infinite fractal parlor sharing the everything of my being with two pure and eternal souls. There's never a moment of bliss where anxiety isn't crawling around its underside, because when happiness reaches its apex, it soon descends. But not here. In this place, I couldn't go and find happiness, just as I couldn't go and find water if I were scuba diving. There's no way getting to it or around it. I'm in it. I breathe it. I taste it. I feel it on my skin. Naturally, anxiety isn't here. Instead of finding a reason for concern, I float and let the ecstatic plane wash me clean. After a moment of forever, I feel something. It's faint, but it grows like a light in a crevasse of my mind, coaxing me back to life. I don't scurry deeper into the dream world, nor do I try climbing out of it. I just remain cozy and content as reality gently lifts the covers off of me and rocks me back awake. These remaining moments stretch on longer and longer, like when 10 minutes before a morning alarm feels like 20 minutes, then 40, and then an hour. As I fade from the wonder world, I make a promise to myself and to the two beings. I swear never to reduce them to fabrications of a dream state, to hallucinations. They're my dear, eternal friends. They've shown me the most divine thing I've ever seen. And it's inside of me, inside of them, inside of you. They gave me a gift that no human ever did. How couldn't I love them? I open my eyes in a realm where natural sight is foreign for a moment. I close them again in what I already know to be a futile attempt to re-enter the fractal galaxy one last time. I accept its end and smile. Oh my God, I say aloud in an awe-stricken finale. Bliss deflates when I hear the sound of my words. They're as rudimentary as a beeping microwave or the revving of an engine, in contrast to the divine communication I've just achieved. This was my first experience with DMT. I decided to do a smallish dose to get to know this magical substance before experimenting with larger doses. I obtained 250 milligrams of this powder in an off-white/yellowish powder. I split it into 5 equal piles, then split one of those into 2 smaller piles. I eyeballed 25 to 30 milligrams, but afterward I decided I really need a .001 gram scale to be more precise with this stuff. It's powerful. Method: I read up on various means of vaporizing DMT. I decided to go with the plastic bottle method for its cheapness and ease, and I have to say I'm happy with it. I got one of those fat Gatorade bottles and cut off the bottom. I then used the cap and 2 sheets of aluminum foil and formed a bowl in the foil with the cap. DMT will run from the flame, so the bowl is essential. This was as also nice as I could take my time vaporizing the powder/crystals with the cap on and fill the bottle completely before taking my hit. I took the whole bottle in one hit. Mindset/setting: I'm a busy grad student right now. I'm just winding up the semester and figured with how short the trip is and the lack of hangover that I could do this on a Friday night with little consequence. I'm a practicing Buddhist. I began prepping my room the day before by cleaning and organizing. I believe it's very important to have a welcoming space for doing drugs, and based on experience. I have experience with MDMA, LSD, shrooms, 2CB, Xanax, and a lot of pot. DMT is a bit intimidating, so I broke my usual habit of diving into drugs head first and aimed for a smallish dose. I've recently made personal breakthroughs in regard to self-compassion and surrendering to my experience instead of fighting it. This helped with engaging with the trip without fear, but I was certainly nervous. I built my rig for smoking at around 10 p.m. and spent the next hour with light music and cleaned my room. Then, I created a nest with a couple blankets and my meditation cushion. I prepped the dose and loaded the device. I lit incense and a couple candles around my room, with one directly in front of me, as I've heard recommended to have a focal point as the trip comes on. I meditated for 20 minutes prior to dosing. I set an intention to surrender to the experience and not try to interact with any beings I may encounter, but just to share the space with them and try to be observant and peaceful. On the day of, I didn't have any other substances besides caffeine, chai, that I sipped through the morning and afternoon. I was effectively sober at time of ingestion. I had smoked half a pack of cigarettes, my first tobacco of any kind in 3 months, in the 3 days previous to the trip. I tossed the rest of the pack and saved one for post-trip contemplation. Dosing, after my meditation, at 11:35 p.m., I felt ready to dive right in. I grabbed my rig and used the flame of a utility lighter to go around the outside of the bowl shape, thus hopefully vaping the powder evenly and preventing it from running, which would be more likely if I just held it dead center under the powder. The bottle filled with milky white smoke, and as soon as I was convinced I'd vaped all the powder, I took one deep breath, exhaled, unscrewed the cap, and took the whole bottle full in one pull and held for approximately 10 seconds. The smoke wasn't too harsh, a bit plastic-white tasting, but nothing harsh enough to make me cough. Trip, all of a sudden the fireplace in front of me with the candle placed in front of it stretches and is taking on an interesting geometric pattern. Geometric patterns take over my field of vision. Then I start to contact the dome, there are beings there. It is all quite intense. I pull out of it at one point for a sip of water, and go back. I'm shifting between very bright, colorful geometric patterns twisting and whirring into a scene of colorful beings, lots of neon pink, lime green, navy blue, and gold. The beings are riding bikes, the ones I remember most clearly are a couple that rides bike to an apartment complex and run inside together. They are cheerful and appear happy/carefree. At this point I need to lay down on the floor. My thoughts are going many places, the most prominent awareness is the intensity of this and the feeling that I'm not quite in the right mindset/physical health to go much further with this substance right now. I begin to come down. It's all felt like a very, very concentrated acid trip. I go in and out with some geometric patterns. The fireplace and candle are still geometric, a calming and beautiful scene I made for myself. The collage on my wall is vibrant and warm, I get a brief moment of self-love. As I pull out more and more, I'm very happy I took the size of dose I did. I am assured that I received good product and know how to approach DMT in the future. The whole thing is effectively over with some glowing at 11:43 p.m., approximately 8 minutes in total. I step outside and smoke my cigarette. I don't feel a whole lot different than I did before. This wasn't any spiritual awakening and I didn't gain much insight. It was a beautiful little introductory dose and I look forward to taking another ride. Takeaway: overall, DMT is an extremely intense substance. The trip could be quite frightening, especially if my mental and physical health weren't strong. I found myself really feeling the impact of the few days of cigarettes on my body. I resolved to abstain from cigarettes and spend more time meditating and exercising before I approach this substance again. I'm planning on at least a week before my second dose. I really want to break through and see what I can make contact with. The scenes I was immersed within were beautiful, cheerful. This substance has such mystical potential. I'm still a bit intimidated but quite excited for more exploration. First DMT trip. I have never done any psychedelic drugs before this experience, except mushrooms, which I wouldn't really consider at all. At least what I had. However, I smoke weed on a daily basis. I was once offered what I was told was some of the most purest acid there was, by a person that blew glass for a living. Not just bowls but beautiful glass sculptures. I refused. Due to that fact I wasn't very comfortable with the new people I was around, but my two friends I was there with did it. Anyhow, what makes this interesting is I just did DMT for the first time tonight, roughly 3 to 3.5 hours ago, at the time of this sentence. My roommate had done it before and had talked about how he would like to get some if he could again. Well, tonight we talked with a good friend who brought up that he knew where some was and had tried it. I listened to his experience, which I will briefly relate. He said there was a lot of colors and like a kaleidoscope type effect. He referenced a few visuals as seeing geometric shapes, and how a person's face he was around was patterned as such. He went into other details that I won't relate mainly due to the fact that I want to relate my experience, however he stressed its intensity. You know it. Me and my roommate picked up a 1-dose bag and went home and split it. It was in a very small plastic bag that people commonly get with shirts that have buttons in them. You may know them better as nickel-sized baggies people sometimes put a blunt of weed or so in. It was faint yellow in color, a powder, which stuck to the bag in a semi-unusual way. Not like coke, this still was formed in almost bubbles. I didn't decide to do it until I got home, i.e. at the place of purchase I said I wouldn't take it. However, as we got back home I realized I was presented with something special and that I should take this gift. Due to some events that would make this annoying report more annoying that I won't say, we did not have any of our weed pieces. We concocted a makeshift gravity from a 1½ gallon high C bottle. We split the DMT, what at the time I thought was 40-60. Me doing 40% of the bag while my roommate did the other 60%. However, my roommate later recalled that he would put it closer to 30-70. We also based it with a tiny amount of heady quality weed. I decided to go first, partially so that my roommate could watch over me. Keep in mind I had no idea what I was getting myself into besides other people's stories. And let me stress, other people's stories don't do justice and could never relate to your personal experience with DMT. The only thing consistent with all the accounts is the colors. He feels the gravity, I hit it, then sit back into the couch and wait. I held in the smoke for what my roommate said was 15 seconds, I could have held longer but I did on purpose to curb my dose. This I should never have done. Besides 10 seconds of tingle and a weird feeling, I got nothing. Shit. Nada. I was upset, mainly with myself for not holding in longer. Oh well, fuck. My roommate goes, and holds it in much longer. He sits back, is very quiet, said a few statements such as oh yay, and floating. For the most part he was very quiet for 4 minutes or so. He had his eyes closed for about 90% of this trip. He then confirms it's legit but said he had a smaller dose than he has ever gotten and said he just saw smoke, and the room faded out a bit. This was hardly a good trip. I was frustrated, so we went back. The guy had just one dose left and my roommate offered to let me have it. I quickly said yes, and vowed to do the whole dose and would hold it in as long as possible. We rescored, and this time we decided to put it all in a one-hitter weed pipe, which was our only other piece at the time. My roommate packs it up, I hit it and hold it in for approximately 50 seconds, this is what my roommate said. The rest of this will be my actual account of description of my first DMT experience. Before I released the smoke, my living room had turned to a shade of orange. Similar to looking through orange sunglasses lenses, however the orange was more like the color of an orange crayon, not a light tint as if I really were looking through orange glasses. This lasted approximately 5 to 10 seconds, then the room turned into a shade of neon green. This color was much more intense and abundant than the weaker, meager orange that paled in comparison. I then began looking at the TV, which we had intentionally put on some music which was coupled by a still picture. I then released the smoke and laid down long ways on a love seat type couch that I was sitting on. I closed my eyes and for about 90% of the remaining time my eyes were closed. I didn't go to another world, I did not have a deeply spiritual experience, and I actually knew where I was and began rubbing my face and holding my palms over each eye. This position and reaction I did nearly the whole time of my trip. Constantly rubbing my face, hair, and constantly covering my eyes with my palms as if I were crying. I was utterly silent for most of the trip. When I closed my eyes I saw an explosion of colors, but the most prominent color was green, now, which was much less neon than it had been before. About 1 minute and I told my roommate to turn the fucking TV off and he did. I saw many colors and were 3D-ish and some patterns. I also felt something that was so deep and intense it is very hard to describe. This was not an emotion, not fear, not love, not acceptance, not excitement or anticipation. None of that bullshit that I have heard other people say about their DMT trips. To be honest, I felt no emotion at all, but this feeling was strong and overwhelming and ever present. This coupled with the colors and an extreme intensity would be the best way to describe my experience. I also felt/remember fragments of my experience that are so fleeting I cannot say if they really happened. I felt a type of presence but not of a human or God or anything like that. I experienced an overwhelming neutral feelings coupled with the presence of something I couldn't adequately explain if I was given the rest of my life to elaborate. There was a brief dialogue between me and my roommate during the trip and some of me talking after I was coming down some. I will also recall this to you. A few minutes in I asked my roommate while my eyes were closed how long had it been. He said 2 minutes. I then recessed into my trip for another few minutes and again asked my roommate how long had passed. He said 5 minutes. This was just a familiar voice coming from my left throughout this experience that I knew was my roommate. These were the only words spoken besides the TV comment until roughly 6 minutes when I began rubbing and covering my eyes more intensely to the point where my roommate asked if I was alright. I responded, yes, I was alright, seemingly more right than I ever had been, but in the same instance not. As I began to come down I opened my eyes and began stammering out my experience. I could only get out a few broken sentences that involved the word unexplainable a few times. I purposely dropped to the floor and put my face, which was in my hands, into the carpet as if I were a Muslim praying. I then had an overwhelming emotion of not sadness but something different. More like a broken understanding of life. I spoke the words I think I am going to cry. My roommate responded, "Go ahead man, it's okay." I then sat up and put my back against the love seat and deeply exhaled. I mainly sat semi-silent, half in shock at what had just happened to me. The next 2 minutes I spoke often but made little sense. Mostly broken statements and exclamations that would not and could not be put into words. I sat dumbfounded and said aloud, "I wish I had that on camera." "You are the only one, Scott," my roommate. "The only one that knows, the only one that will ever know." This concluded my trip. Lastly, I want to explain something that I would say is the most important part of this whole very long encounter. The most important thing is this experience was very dreamlike in the sense that once it is over, the experience is so fleeting, so distant, it becomes harder and harder by the second to remember exact elements of the experience. This angered me but also allured me. This beautiful thing, this beautiful experience, this gift, would become harder to remember and harder to cherish. I read 2 testimonials before I wrote my own, and one thing another person said about their experience with DMT rang very true with me. The fact that the more you try to articulate and recall the experience, the more it diminishes the trueness and unexplainableness of the experience. It truly is something that cannot be successfully articulated. It just can't. The experience cannot be shared, and as I read over what I have typed, I understand that I have only served to diminish the experience, and turn it into an absurdly inadequate written version quote from him that explains it all. I thank you for reading, but not as much as I thank myself for writing this.